Welcome from the State of Affairs podcast this Sunday evening. I've got with me a very important guest, Dr. Sameer Patil, who is a senior fellow at the Observer Research Foundation. He has recently joined the Delhi Center of the ORF. Uh, Normally, what we do, we just track the geopolitical discourse, and we do talk off the cuff with about art, about some other things. But today, it's a very important topic, given the dimensions, given the things that have been evolving over the time, especially during this pandemic. We'll be talking with him about his book that deals with the cyber era and the threats and the dimensions India has looked into, and where actually India stands into the entire cyber discourse or cyber security discourse. Mr. Patil has been always into the research, and he comes up with something as brilliant as anything. The papers, the entire thing, the track 1.5, track 2 point something, and also the other stuff that he's also dealing with. A very renowned researcher at the ORF. I'll just attach the link and the other introduction about him with this video once it's posted on the YouTube. But I'll just run down to this entire uh, 30 minutes discussion that I'm conducting, and I hope that I'll make most of it, because it's rarely that I get a chance to speak with the research with the people who deal with the research at the ORF or some other policy institute. So I'm just rushing down to this session. Welcome to this podcast, Dr. Sameer Patil, sir.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
So we often talk about the cyber security and the dimensions it has for India. I mean, if I properly put it into the right perspective, there has been a lot of talk about this thing since we have been just out of this pandemic, at least tentatively. Lots of things since the world in has changed to this entire digital market, digital infrastructure, and also doing the things only through the internet. So there are threats that may emanate from this, from the different non-state actors, and especially the regulations and the entire legal discourse that's evolving in India about this cyber security or cyber arena. You have written a book on this cyber security and cyber era and the state of cyber security in India. I'll just like to invite you to just deal with this briefly, what this book is all about, and what largely theme it has got with it. So over to you, sir.
Thank you so much, Mehraj, for inviting me, and apologies for a really poor internet connection. But yeah, so as you said, that my book actually deals with India's cybersecurity challenges, and the book is titled "Securing India in the Cyber Era." My attempt actually is to look at some of the foremost security challenges that India faces in the cyberspace in the last 1.5 decades, and see what kind of response Indian state has given to these challenges. So first, I actually look at the overall geopolitical scenario in terms of the cyberspace, where I track the fact that basically today the geopolitical rivalries are actually spilling into the cyberspace, which means that nation states are actually considering cyberspace as one more frontier to settle their geopolitical rivalries. If you see, for instance, currently what is happening in Ukraine, uh, that this particular fact is fully evident because Russia has used cyberspace to achieve its military objectives by attacking the Ukrainian computer networks, Ukrainian critical infrastructure, as well as focusing on the element of disinformation and propaganda through social media. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges that we are facing today in terms of the use of cyberspace for fulfilling geopolitical and military objectives. But that is not just with the case of Russia and Ukraine. In fact, this is the trend for the last 7 or 8 years, where we have more than that, where actually cyberspace has become an extension of the geopolitical rivalries. We have already seen, for instance, how the virus called as Stuxnet, which was allegedly designed by the United States and Israel, tried to target the Iranian nuclear program. We have also seen, for instance, how the North Korean regime has used a variety of cyber tactics to hit back at South Korea, Japan, as well as the United States. So I look at this global geopolitical cyber scenario and see, what are the implications for India. And when we look at India, the first thing which is clearly evident is the fact that India has the second largest internet user base in the world today, which is approximately 700 million users, just after China. And this is the first generation internet users. This is the first generation internet users who are coming to cyberspace and therefore are largely unaware of the cybersecurity scenario, which means that they lack the cyber hygiene, which is the fact that that they don't know how to conduct themselves responsibly in the online sphere. So they don't know, for instance, whom to respond and whom not to respond when it comes to the phishing emails which asks for personal information. There, for instance, there's a very poor financial literacy when it comes to the digital payment transactions and all those things. So that has actually created I would say, a good entry point for many cyber hackers to actually target India's computer networks. And in fact, we have seen in the past few years, how cyber crime has been on the rise in terms of the financial frauds, in terms of phishing emails. Uh, you may have heard about, for instance, what is called as the Nigerian email scams, where you get an email from someone unknown person claiming to be an important official from a regime and saying that he or she has some amount of personal fortune left, which has been now which has been now interdict by the government, and therefore they want to release that money, and therefore they want you to invest in that particular venture so that they can get the money out and that they can share that money with you. So those are kind of things which have been on the rise in the past few years. But apart from the targeting of the individual users, we have also seen how India's adversaries have actually used cyberspace to also target India's critical infrastructure. Uh, for instance, just recently we have seen how the Chinese hackers tried to probe into India's power grids in Ladakh. And that actually has been, and that kind of activity has been on the rise for the last so many years. So I actually look at these kind of cybersecurity challenges. So in that, I've looked at the three major challenges. One is basically the critical infrastructure protection. The critical infrastructure is that kind of infrastructure which needs to be operational 24/7. Any disruption or degradation of that particular service means that it will have implications not just for the economy but also for the society as such. Think, for instance, your financial systems. Think, for instance, your healthcare, your hospitals, or for instance, your railway traffic management system or the airport traffic control. This is a critical infrastructure which needs to be operational 24/7. And we have seen in the past how nation states are actually targeting the vulnerabilities of the critical infrastructure to settle their geopolitical rivalries. For India, this particular challenge emerged in the aftermath of the Stuxnet virus, when the virus which was supposed to target the Iranian computer network actually traveled through multiple servers across many jurisdictions, and before it reached the target in Iran. And in that process, it basically affected the functioning of many manufacturing plants. It affected many critical infrastructure. So, in case of India also, when the virus traveled through the Indian computer networks, there was a disruption of services at some of the oil pipelines in Gujarat and Haryana, as well as the disruption of the oil rig of the ONGC, the Oil and Natural Gas Corporation of India. So even though these disruptions and these infections were really minor, but that still made India the third largest victim of the Stuxnet virus after Iran and Indonesia. So since then, since 2010, when this virus came, critical infrastructure protection has emerged as a major security challenge, and India's regulators have actually tried to plug these gaps through many policy measures. But as we saw recently, the Chinese targeting of the power structure of the power grids, these efforts are really falling short given the enormity of the challenge. So that's the first cybersecurity challenge that we looked at. The second challenge that we looked at was in the form of the digital payment systems, and how, for instance, India in the last few years has made strides on the digital economy and cashless India. And despite the growing use of the digital payment systems, there is also a rise in the cyber crimes as well as a continued targeting of the bank payment systems by outside hackers. So, for instance, the North Koreans have been running for a very long time an operation which is through a through a cybersecurity through a cyber hacking agent syndicate called as the Lazarus Group. Now, this Lazarus Group became particularly infamous for targeting of the banks worldwide and targeting the banks and stealing the money from it. So, for instance, in 2016, the Lazarus Group tried to steal $100 million, $1 billion rather, from the Bangladesh bank account in the U.S. Federal Reserve. They were successful in stealing at least $100 million from it, but that was not just one heist. The Lazarus Group has been trying to do that for many other banks. So India's Cosmos Bank, for instance, in Pune, lost almost was 94 crores through this kind of fraud through the Lazarus Group, and it was never able to recover that money. So that just puts in front of the regulators another challenge, which is the targeting of the digital payment systems and the banking systems by the hacking syndicates, as well as these other sorts of financial frauds which happen at the individual level through the phishing scams and those kind of things. And I again looked at, for instance, what kind of measures Reserve Bank of India is putting in place to protect not just the digital economy but also the individual digital payment users, so that the users in a sense develop some kind of confidence and security that when they're using the digital payment systems, they have a sense that this particular payment system is secure, that their card details are secure, that when they make a transaction on the card or when they make an internet banking transaction, they know that they will not be a victim of a fraud. So those kind of steps the RBI has taken. And the third challenge is it's little curious because this is something which has not been discussed widely, but it has been on the rise for the past so many years worldwide, which is the challenge of dark web. Now, dark web is basically part of the deep web, so that it is that part of the internet which is hidden from the general internet. So the internet that you and me use every day is just that I would say about 25% of the internet traffic. Beyond that is the vast internet traffic which is which is hidden from the regular users, and that's the 75%, and that's the deep web. So the deep web can actually be, for instance, be all your unindexed pages which don't figure in the Google search engine or Yahoo search engine. It can be even, for instance, all those databases. It can be also for instance, anything which is hidden beyond a login page, that kind of internet. But there's also another internet, which is basically the part of the hidden internet, which can be accessible only through an encrypted browser. And that browser is known as the onion router or the Tor browser. So it's called as a Tor technology. So Tor technology allows you to access that part of the internet, which you cannot access through your Google Chrome browser or Microsoft Edge and so on and so forth. So once you access that internet to the Tor browser, what the Tor browser actually does is that it actually, in a sense, makes you anonymous. So it hides your IP location, the computer address that you're using, and that actually means that you, when you are there out there in the accessing the internet, your location is not shown, your whereabouts are not shown, and that anonymity actually has been misused and used by many elements. So on the positive side, it has been used by people who want to escape the security agency's surveillance. For instance, people who are facing political persecution, people who want to give out some kind of a secretive information, for instance, whistleblowers who may have access to some confidential emails or confidential papers, but they want to reveal the extent of corruption or fraud. Human rights activists, another category, which do positively use this kind of technology. But there are also people who misuse it, and cyber are one such element, as well as the terrorist groups, which actually use this kind of technology to also, to also propagate their activities. So I have looked at that challenge of the dark web and looked at the implications of it for India security. And I basically say that there are three implications of it. One is the fact that it obviously gives amplifies the cyber crimes, because many of the sites on the deep web actually sell all the stolen passwords, stolen financial information, the passport details, credit card details, Aadhaar card details, which can be used to commit financial fraud. The second element of that is the use of this platform by the terrorist groups, not just for the propaganda but also for the fundraising, and that itself is a big challenge, emerging challenge for India. But third and most important challenge for India of this deep web phenomenon is basically the element of drug smuggling, because 95% of the items which are sold on the deep web are basically narcotic substances. So there are many platforms in India which actually engage in this kind of drug smuggling. And the fact is that if you look at offline drug smuggling in India, India actually sits in between the two drug trading hubs, the Golden Crescent and the Golden Triangle. So this kind of online drug sale actually perpetuates this offline drug smuggling syndicates. So I have looked at this challenge of the dark web, or the deep web for India security, and see what kind of again measures India has put in place. And overall, I argue that that cybersecurity actually is a work in progress. There are many steps which the government has taken, but given the ever advancing nature of the cyberspace and the ever evolving nature of the cyber threat landscape itself, these efforts are not adequate. In fact, the users themselves have to be aware of these cybersecurity threats.
Thank you for this elaborate explanation of what are, if I rightly just club this entire long list of things that you have just actually delved into. There are the fact is that the digital density in India is quite increasing. It's on the up. And the second thing is that India has large expansion of its digital assets. But at the other level, if we see it from the other dimension, there has to be some system at place. There has to be provisions at place. I mean, there are legal provisions also in place, but the servers that are outside India, say for example, outside India's territorial jurisdiction, the internet is a domain, as we all know. It's something that we have not the control of the servers that actually operate from outside. So let's break it for into two or three things. Say for example, in the infrastructure, for the, we can say, for the awareness that people must have in order to actually make this country and make their own digital well-being work like in a good way, and the provisions that come into this. What are the things that, in order to have a discourse or a narrative on this cyber security in India, what are the things that actually are the big impediments into this? One, I have said that there are the servers that operate from outside, and mostly internet does the term you rightly mentioned was the dark web or the deep internet. We can say that most of the servers do operate, and India, that has such a vast digital assets on the expansion, and we are the first generation digital learners, and obviously this is a generation, and next one that will come, obviously there has to be some infrastructure at work. So I would like you to actually come on this point, that do have we evolved as a country? What are the things that we need to do? What are the things that we have to put in place in order to increase? Because there has been lots of cases and scamsters just coming up in the, even some of the good journalists in renowned journalists who have been fished upon by these scamsters, and their through their emails, and there are different. So you rightly mentioned one thing was the Tor system, because people aren't, I mean, smartphones are there in large numbers, in just billions. But the issue is that if you have a smartphone, if we have smartphones, so we may at least, we must at least possess the basic knowledge that actually gets into this. So, and I've just come across one more important fact, is that the corporate sector and the private companies that do have to also share this responsibility. There has to be an amount of responsibility put place. They must be brought into this legal provisions of this entire cybersecurity discourse. So you just delve a bit on into this thing, that what are the big challenges in front of us, because we are just running out of time. We have just 5 or 10 minutes left. So over to you, sir.
So I would say that there are a couple of things. One is, if you look at the national level, certain things which the government is trying to do. For instance, you mentioned about the, the data which is stored on the foreign servers. And that, for instance, India is dealing with that fact by imposing data localization, which is that at least for certain types of payment transactions, that data should be stored locally, because one of the and I have mentioned that in the book. One of the things that Indian security agencies have been facing for a long time, the challenge that the Indian security agencies are facing, is the fact that they don't get access, timely access to the data which is needed for the cyber criminal investigations. So therefore, India has tried to address that challenge by ensuring that all the payment related data will be stored on the Indian territory, so that the Indian security agencies can get access to that. Of course, there are certain companies which are opposed to this, and India has penalized those companies. For instance, Mastercard and Amex were the ones. The creditor companies which actually had to face the wrath of the Reserve Bank of India for not complying with data localization. When it comes to the corporates, in fact, one thing which I have mentioned also in the book is the fact that very often corporates actually do not trust the government, and that is basically a function of many things. One is that that they don't trust the government because they don't have the confidence in the government's ability to solve cybersecurity problems. The second is that they feel that if they work with the government, that all the data that they're sharing with the government might be leaked, and therefore that data might be used by their competitors for advancing their business interests, and therefore they don't want to work with the government. But it's also true, that unless the corporates work with the government, because ultimately cybersecurity is a comprehensive challenge. If only one element of it is functioning to breach that gap, then it is not going to work. Which is why the corporates in the commercial sector and the industry has to work with the government to plug these cybersecurity challenges. And thirdly, if you look at the individual level, I would say that, as I said, that many internet users don't have the knowledge about cyber security threats. So the only way to go about is to keep oneself updated, at least about the basics of cybersecurity, which is that, for instance, when it comes to the financial transactions, you should not be, for instance, sharing your OTPs or your login passwords. Or for that matter, you should always be changing your emails passwords or the other website passwords after every 6 months, and those passwords should be compliant with should be at least complicated enough so that the bots or the machines cannot recognize them. So there are these kind of steps which the government needs to actually that every element of the cybersecurity ecosystem needs to take, and it is only then that this challenge can be addressed. And one final thing is which I actually learned from the counterterrorism field is that the terrorist has to be successful once to show the success, that they are able, that they have carried out a terrorist attack. But security agencies have to be successful 100%. Only then they can say claim success. So similar is the case of the cybersecurity. It is only when all the elements do the work 100%, they can claim a success. But the cyber criminals have to strike only once to claim success. So it is a case of 100% versus 1%, which we have to constantly aware of. So our aim should be always for 100%, whereas the terrorists are, I mean, the cyber terrorists or cyber criminals are only aiming for 1%.
There are also some non-negotiable, that I say they are non-negotiable elements of the cyber security. So they are there is a nodal agency that's missing. There is also something that's called corporate sector must at least bear some responsibility. There is also an element of human error. There are also something that we can integrating cybersecurity with our national agenda. That's an important thing that we can do actually. And a robust, at the end of the day, we need a robust cybersecurity policy. So are we on that line? Do we have certain discourse at place, a narrative that's taking shape, that we need to have a cybersecurity policy at the national level, so that it helps us as a country, and we can just have a legal way to deal with any cyber threat. Because normally what it takes, if there's a security breach across the world, it takes 7 days to just track it down, and in India it takes 9 days. normally. So there is a difference because our recently our electricity grids were under threat, and also such a fragile digital infrastructure. It just is something that can go against our sovereignty, go against our national interests, and also can put risk. Lives of millions of people at risk. So we need, because government must not come just compromise on these things. This is non-negotiable. At the end of the day, this is non-negotiable, because these are the things that I have just written down once I was going through that entire presentation, that these are the non-negotiable things, sir. The last thing I'd like from you to deal with this thing, that are we evolving as is the legal discourse on the cybersecurity, or is the discourse of cybersecurity evolving the way we should have evolved, or there is something that there is more to it, or we need to just improvise upon that?
So I would say, that all the challenges that you listed, actually, one good thing is that the government has treated cybersecurity as a policy priority, which means for a very long time the government has been putting in place not just the umbrella regulation, which is, for instance, the National Cybersecurity Policy, or for that matter, the Information Technology Act of 2000, which is amendment in 2008, but also the smaller micro level regulations. For instance, the Computer Emergency Response Team India, which is a CERT-in, which is basically the nodal agency for dealing with cybersecurity issues at the national level, has been issuing lots of advisories to the general as well as internet users about what kind of cybersecurity threats which are there, what kind of malware or the malicious software which is roaming on the Indian computer networks. And every user is supposed to go there and look at that particular thing. And then from the Reserve Bank of India has put in place a lot of technical standards for the banks, the cooperative banks, as well as for the mobile wallet operators like Paytm and all that, to ensure that they don't end up becoming the victims of any kind of fraud. And even the users of these mobile wallets don't end up becoming the victims of the fraud. So that just shows that there is that particular element which is there, which is that that they are taking those steps to ensure that the average internet user remains safe from these things. And as you said, there are certain non-negotiables which are there. And I think the government is ensuring that that they do not that they're not violated. Which is, for instance, the fact that uh, in the last few years, I would say in the last 2 or 3 years, there's also a rise in the offensive Indian cyber operations, which is that now that the Chinese and other adversaries are hitting out at India's computer networks, even the Indian hackers are taking retaliatory measures to hit out at other adversaries' computer networks, and there is a rise in that particular in that particular dimension also in those activities also. So yes, so in a sense, India has drawn those red lines, and therefore. A concerted action not just by the government but also by the private hackers is ensuring that whenever there is a violation of those red lines, they are retaliated.
For the viewers, Dr. Patil has actually written a book, Securing India in the Cyber Era. That's a very, very important read for all the people and all the students and scholars alike. They must just go through this book, and I'm again, calling it out, naming it out. Actually, it's Securing India in the Cyber Era. It's a very wonderful book. I have not yet received my copy, but ordered it. It's 2022 publication. Very lovely. I'm seriously looking for that. The amount of research that he has actually put into this, and I expect that it's at par excellence, because this is a new domain that has a tremendous potential and the new insights. I hope that the book covers entirely all the things, the way we actually look at the papers you write and you come up with your commentaries at the ORF. Thank you, sir, for joining us. Thanks from State of Affairs podcast.
Thank you so much for inviting me. Thank you so much. Best wishes.